welcome to another edition of The Narrative, your platform for interviews, debate, and commentary on some of the burning issues of the day. I'm your storyteller, Calistro Faria. Every weekday, we go there with guests from across the region and around the world telling interesting stories like no one else can. On this edition of The Narrative, Guyana's press freedom under the microscope, after President Ali's first post-inauguration presser drew fire over who got in and what could be asked. The Reporters Without Borders 2025 index ranks Guyana at 73rd, urging a reset by the Reporters Without Borders with the media. And we examine the press freedom issues in Guyana at a pivotal moment, just days after the second term swearing in, and amid all of these fresh questions about access. Several outlets say they were left off the invitation list for the president's first post-inauguration press conference, where limits were reportedly placed on the number and scope of questions, sparking backlash from journalists and the Guyana Press Association. And this comes as Reporters Without Borders said the 2025 World Press Freedom Index places Guyana at 73rd out of 180 countries. And also, crucially, that organization flags a weak political environment for the media, urging the new administration, as I said, to reset its relationship with journalists. Regionally, the regional picture is that mixed. The OECS bloc collectively ranks 48th. And this year, an improvement over last year, apparently, and a generally satisfactory environment for journalists, according to Reporters Without Borders. Within CARICOM, Trinidad and Tobago now leads the region at 19th, Jamaica stands at 26th, and Suriname at 32nd, and they're all ahead of Guyana on this year's table. With that context, we're joined by a veteran Guyanese editor and broadcaster, Enrico Woolford, to discuss how Guyana measures up or doesn't measure up, what needs improving and what doesn't, and what concrete steps are needed to safeguard independent journalism in Guyana. Welcome to the program, Enrico.
Thank you very much for having me on the program today.
Well, you know, the question of press freedom, it is one that even here in Grenada, we are I see we're in the OECS bloc and we ranked at 48, but we are constantly in this battle to protect and to defend press freedom, even here. But in Guyana, you're at 73rd, which really is very low down on the table compared to Guyana's neighbors. And all of this conversation coming to the fore now because of what happened a few days ago. President Ali just coming through his swearing in, and already these concerns about access. From your vantage point, what do these recent developments tell us about the state of press freedom in Guyana today?
It's very disconcerting. It's uncomfortable. It is disturbing, if I can put it in that kind of context. What I think has been happening is there is an effort to control the narrative, to let the government try to say what the government wants to say, as if the government is in a vacuum by itself, and as if the government is some kind of kingdom that it's able to decide for all the people. Without having that conduit, that feedback mechanism, that a proper press arrangement can bring to a democracy. The reason that we are members of the press is to ensure that there's accountability, there's justice, there is credibility in the messages, but apparently the method in Guyana and the attitude in Guyana is to be very aggressive toward those messages.
And at that press conference in particular, the post-inauguration press conference, where several media outlets have said they were excluded or there were restrictions on the number of questions. I think I read somewhere 6 issues, 6 questions. I was trying to, break that apart and understand what it meant. Maybe you can help with that. Is this an isolated incident or part of a pattern?
I don't think it is. I think there's a pattern that, look, we are going to bring a certain set of people together We decide, we cherry pick those people, and then we cherry pick how long they can ask questions, and we restrict that. And that attitude is quite wrong in terms of not only a developing society, but in terms of a democratic society. And what happened in this case is that the president's office has accredited certain journalists, let's say two from one newspaper or one news agency, that kind of thing. And because they have done that, they then decide whom they're going to call and ask that person to come in. That completely ignores the editorial position of the newspaper or the editorial board or the editor-in-chief for that matter. And what could happen and what may be happening is what I want to call press concubinage, where the president's office decides that this is my person. This is my person on the inside that I will then deal with. And that kind of press concubinage is not necessarily good for any society. You may not even realize that you are being the concubine, the acolyte, the sycophant of the particular government, because, or the supplicant, because you think that as a reporter, you get invited, you get a special invitation from His Excellency.
You have a seat at the table and you feel like you're somewhere close to the inner circle.
Yes, and here's the danger. Here's the danger in a small country like Guyana, where offers can be made. You can get a house lot, you can get a duty-free car. I'm not saying that these things are happening now, but more likely than not, when persons have money, they will spend. I think the Jamaicans have a saying, when dog get money, you buy flea. So in essence, what we have is not only the buying of the population, but the buying of the press. And that is disconcerting. Stabrook News, news stores run by Gordon Mosley, Demerara Waves, run by Dennis Chabrol, all these operations will tell you that even in terms of government advertising, they have major challenges. Stabrook News is more fortunate because it's a newspaper. It gets ads, but it doesn't get paid. If you talk with Demerara Waves, you talk with Capital News Self, you talk with Gordon Mosley from News Source, they will tell you that they don't even get government ads. So that is another way of squeezing the press, using the advertising section to decide how the editorial section could go. But let me go back to this particular press conference with regard to how it was structured. The president, the press secretary introduces the president. The president introduces the consultant, who is a guy by the name of Kit Nascimento, way in his 90s. Some people are saying he's way past his shelf life. Kit is my friend. He was once my boss. He's a good guy, but indeed, it may be time for him to not use the methods that were used in the 60s when he began as a young reporter, to try to control the narrative. So the president gets to speak for about 20, 30 minutes sometimes, and then you restrict it to 6 questions. What you have there is not a press conference, it's a lecture.
But interestingly, Enrico, we have almost the exact same thing happening in Grenada when it comes to particularly news conferences given by the Prime Minister, for instance. They speak for whole length of time. They call it an introduction. Then there's very little time left. Then you have limited to 2 questions per person. At least we're doing a little better than Guyana in that regard. 2 questions per person. And then there's a closing segment as well. So they open and they close, and the period for questioning, the whole point of the news conference, is shrunk into a very small block of time in that. But you say you spoke of the gentleman who you feel is using 1960s tactics now, but he's not advising Grenada, as far as I know. Do you think that with this Grenada example that I've provided, that we're looking at some sort of collective effort to control and manipulate how information is given by governments?
Look, cholesterol has always been that way in effect. That it's just that at times we move and we allow some servant leaders decide, well, I need to be more accountable. I need to be more credible. I need to speak to the people, and don't necessarily use the media conferences, the press conference, in that way. But look around the world, beginning in places like the United States, where persons are in fact being chided for asking certain questions. In Guyana, um, there's a labeling of journalists as anti-government in a bid to make them not want to ask questions. In fact, it's a veiled threat, so to speak. From the moment you open your mouth and you start, you're fake news, we don't like you, you reported that incorrectly, and what have you.
You're trying to take the government down. That's
Yeah, but the governments are there to account to the people. I like stage and theater and so on. Besides being a journalist, and if you remember, there was a sitcom called The Jeffersons, where the servant would answer the employer, well, you get the door, you know, saying that to the employer. The people are the employers, not the servant. The servant is the government, and the government has to serve the people, and the press is there to ensure that the government keeps its word, does its job as servants, not kings. It's not a monarchy. It's not a feudal system. It is a democracy, and therefore access to information is very important, and the lack thereof is of concern. Journalists are tossed around, from the vice president, who keeps a press conference at his party headquarters every week and goes on for nearly 45 minutes in a soliloquy, in a monologue. And then there are persons there who are obviously there with planted questions, and they ask these softball questions, and anybody else attempting to ask about the oil and gas sector, about access to information or anything else, they are then put down.
Now, Enrico, you spoke of the government of Guyana using state advertising to squeeze and to put pressure, use economic pressure to probably sway editorial lines. Is that? I mean, it seems to be a problem here in Grenada as well. I'll tell you that. Do you? To what extent is it working? To what extent is political patronage and advertising, state advertising resources, as it is used in that manner, influencing journalists in Guyana to toe the line that may be established by any administration?
That's why I began by calling it, press concubinage, um, because it is a very uncomfortable position to be in. 200 years after slavery, almost, we are still trying to decide that the persons who are doing the work, who you need, must kowtow to the king, must kowtow to the plantation owner, and that is a major challenge. And if you put rules and regulations and laws in place, like Guyana has a cybercrime law, and then that is weaponized. If you use the fact that I will then provide you with more meals, I will treat you better on the plantation, then what you're doing is weaponizing the financial reward that somebody will get. And Martin Carter, Guyana's national poet, has written about the mouth is muzzled, by who feeds it, So one has to be very concerned that we do not use these methods as part of press control and then say, that we have to deal with fake news, we have to deal with false narratives and what have you. The people can think for themselves, Callisto. The people can think. So they will immediately recognize if something doesn't sound quite right and would ask for support, for evidence, for documentation, for anything. Yes, in today's world with social media that allows faster dissemination, right? You will have some things falling through the cracks and people believing all kind of stupidness, as Guyanese want to say. But at the same time, the reason we have responsible press is for the responsible press to separate the wheat from the chaff, to separate the good from the bad. And that is why it is important for the Guyana Press Association and for press operatives, both in Guyana and the Caribbean, to continue this vigorous work to make sure that they're intrepid, they are brave, they are courageous, and ask the right questions to get the right answers. But it is not for any person in authority, including the private sector, including the private, not just government.
Corporate also, yes. Corporate also can be a culprit, yes.
Yes. Resort owners, hoteliers, beverage manufacturers, whoever may want to get their point across. Good for them. Hire public relations organizations to do that. The press is not there to do that for you. The press is there to hold people accountable and to be credible and to be a conduit between the people and those in power. And those in power are put there by the people. They are servants. I'm sorry if I get very upset about this. But what we think is that once an election has been held, sovereignty passes from the people to the elected leaders. They now become the sovereign. No, that's not it. That's not how it works. Sovereignty still remains with the people in most jurisdictions. And the people decide whether they want to see change in their society. Yes, of course. Every now and then, every 5 years, every 4 years, depending on the jurisdiction, you will have an election, and those elected representatives are expected to do the bidding of not only those who elected them, but those who didn't. In every society, we don't really elect a leader of the opposition. Anybody running for office, they're not running to be in the opposition. They are running to be the prime minister, the president, the representative. If they lose, then they have to put themselves in the position as an alternative government. Yes, they understand that matrix, they understand that paradigm, but the press is there to ensure that there is a flow of information. Guyana has a serious problem. Even the Commissioner of Information, Charles Ramson Sr., former Attorney General, retired judge, CCH, that's a Cacique Crown of Honor or whatever order he has, he does not even give information. And in fact, trying to get information from him is like the proverbial saying, is trying to get water from a rock, you know, and he has decided whether he is going to give information or not.
Let me ask you though, with the advent of social media and something that they're calling citizen journalists, and everybody having access to a smartphone and being able to put information out, some even simulating journalism and attempting to do that, but being very irresponsible in the manner in which they deal with information that comes into their possession. While politicians have always sought to manipulate and to set the narrative and to control the narrative, do you see any sort of change and any sort of intensification that may be as a result of the fact that people are out there on different sides of the political spectrum using social media and disguising themselves as media people? And that may be journalists who are mainstream media who are following the canons and the ethics of the profession are getting caught in the crossfire.
Yes, of course, and I think you put it quite comprehensively. The challenge is that everybody, is a reporter, everybody is a citizen journalist, everybody. But think about it. Before the widespread use of the platforms, the way journalists gathered information was from the very people. They went out there, they listened, they got calls on the telephone, people wrote them letters, they walked the streets, they interacted with people, right? So you get information from people. So some of the information that you get, you then have to distill it and check to see whether it's truthful, whether it's useful, and then put it out. So there's the role there always for what people are calling legacy media or traditional media or what have you. Yes, of course, there are going to be people who are going to run with gossip. But I remember Walter Cronkite once said that news is also responsible gossip. Basically, you are meeting people every evening on the tube, on the telly, and saying, look, this is what I heard. And this is what I was able to check that happened with the prime minister today. Or this is what happened in parliament today. And this is, you're telling a story. Huh? But it is highly irresponsible for you just as a legacy or a traditional media person to go out there and, just call people names, put a story out there that has not been checked. And every single journalist with any kind of ethics knows that that is not what you do. But government at the same time should not legislate like Guyana has in terms of the cybercrime legislation and then weaponize it. They should not use criminal sedition, criminal libel, criminal defamation against journalists. It is quite wrong.
And then we find that, but then there's also the issue where these the public members of the public who are now free to tell the rest of the public what they find out, what they know, what they think they know, are also now being mistaken in Grenada, I know for sure, being considered and being called outright reporters and journalists, and that line is blurring. How do we deal, because that also, in my opinion, is also a threat to press freedom. How do we deal with a problem like that, where a lady with a podcast on her lawn is presenting herself as a news reporter, or being misidentified by the public as a news reporter, and then her bad behavior, the legacy media gets tarred with the same brush of her bad behavior? How do we escape that?
If I can put it in an anecdote, Caribbean people like to tell a story before they make the point. um, if I can put it in an anecdote that I grew up uh, in an environment that I grew up, my mom was in nursing. Okay, she was a practical nurse at first, but she wasn't a registered nurse. She wasn't the ward maid or the cook, right? But whom do you decide to ask the question in terms of a medical issue? You ask the doctor, right? So the legacy press, to my um, understanding, are the doctors of the society, right? While the nurses interact and the nurse aides interact and the ward maids and so on, they interact with patients. They are not the final authority with regard to how a patient ought to be treated. Therefore, we cannot
They
say,
certainly cannot prescribe medication.
thank you, Jesus, as my mother used to say. So essentially, we have a challenge here where every single person who might even be the porter in the hospital deciding that because I have access, because I know what is going on, or I think I do, I'm going to say and speak. And therefore, I then get, an audience of 200,000 or a million people, as the case may be. And I just use that authority that I have. Now, here is why it is dangerous, and here is also why it is good. It is good from an advertising point of view because people tend to follow whatever persons are saying in terms of buying, in terms of an economic activity. But it is dangerous if it is used willy-nilly, if there is a laissez-faire approach to it, and if it ruptures the society in a way that can cause not only economic harm, but social harm to the society, mental harm to the society. And therein lies the problem. And the danger is what societies attempt to do is they attempt to legislate and regulate rather than communicate and integrate persons with the knowledge of proper ethical journalism, like the Guyana Press Association, like the press associations around the Caribbean, and say, how do we solve what we see as a challenge to the society? But if we want to berate and downgrade and diminish and demean and denigrate members of the press, particularly the legacy media, we are getting nowhere. And we are creating societies that will implode, unfortunately. I don't like to take bad things and hold them in high esteem. uh, I don't think disorder and a breakdown of law and order is necessarily a good thing for the society. But look at what happened in Nepal recently. Look at what happened in Indonesia. Look at what happened years ago in the Arab countries and what have you. what can happen is that the people who are the power in the society will one day get fed up, you know, and create challenges for those who think that they are the kings.
Enrico, I want to take a break here. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about just how the relationship between press and government has changed over the years as you have watched governments come and governments go and press people come and go. We'll take a break here now. I'm on with Enrico Woolford, and we're talking about press freedom in Guyana, as well as the state of affairs in the wider Caribbean. We'll take a look at what's happening outside of Guyana as far as press freedom is concerned when we come back from this break, as well as to get Enrico's personal experiences on changes in the relationship between the government and the press in Guyana over his very long and storied career. More when we come back.
Understand